Rick Boone knelt beside the enormous iron safe, carefully drilling holes in precise patterns that made no sense to an observer. The rusted metal shrieked as the drill bit tore through decades of corrosion, creating openings that seemed random, but followed an invisible blueprint only he could see. His calloused hands moved with a surgeon's precision, measuring distances with a peculiar wooden tool he had carved himself. The Granger family had laughed until their sides ached when he'd paid good money for what they called worthless scrap. Even the seller, Clyde Baxter, had tried to talk him out of the purchase, insisting the old safe was beyond repair and utterly useless. But Rick had insisted, counting out silver coins with the quiet resolve of a man who saw something others missed. Now, 3 days later, strange materials continued to arrive at his workshop. Copper pipes that gleamed like new coins, glass vessels of varying sizes, metal gears so small they could rest on a child's palm, and lengths of rubber hose that he inspected with the intensity of a doctor studying a patient. Each item seemed unrelated to the next, yet Rick arranged them with the confidence of someone following a master plan. Rebecca Granger began inventing excuses to ride past his property, her curiosity an insistent itch she couldn't scratch. What could anyone possibly build with a broken safe and such bizarre components? Her father, Virgil, dismissed Rick as a fool chasing foolish dreams. But Rebecca saw the steady focus in Rick's eyes, the look of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The most intriguing part was how Rick worked in complete silence, never explaining his purpose to anyone who asked. When neighbors inquired about his project, he would simply offer a polite nod and continue his mysterious modifications. The safe door was propped open like a gaping metal mouth, revealing an interior that Rick had completely gutted and was now rebuilding with components no one could identify. Something was taking shape inside that rusted iron husk, but what it was remained as closely guarded as the secrets the safe had once protected. The morning Rick Boone first laid eyes on that safe, Clyde Baxter was trying to haul it away with 2 mules and a heavy-duty rope. The iron behemoth had been sitting behind the general store for months, a monument to someone's failed enterprise. Rust had claimed its entire surface, and the lock mechanism had seized up years ago. Most people who passed by didn't even give it a second glance. Rick approached it slowly, running his calloused fingers over the pitted metal as if reading something written in a language only he understood. The safe was nearly as tall as his chest and twice as wide. Its weight settled deep into the earth beneath it. What caught his eye wasn't the obvious decay, but the solid construction beneath the corrosion. "Don't waste your time studying that old thing," Clyde shouted, wiping sweat from his brow. "I've been trying to move it for 3 months. I think I'll just drag it to the ravine and be done with it. It's nothing but dead weight now." Rick circled the safe one more time, his mind already working through possibilities that would have seemed like madness to anyone else watching. He could see past the rust, past the broken lock, past what everyone else considered irreparable damage. This wasn't junk. It was potential. "What do you want for it?" Rick asked, his voice low. Clyde stopped wrestling with the rope and stared. "Are you serious? It's nothing but rust and disappointment. The lock's been broken for years. Can't even shut the door right anymore." "How much?" $10, and you haul it yourself," Clyde said, certain he was dealing with a fool but unwilling to pass up an easy sale. Rick counted out the coins without hesitation. By nightfall, the news had spread through town like a brush fire. The newcomer, Rick Boone, had bought Clyde's worthless safe for real money. The Granger family heard the story at supper and Virgil nearly choked on his coffee. $10 for that piece of scrap? Virgil laughed, slapping the table so hard the plates rattled. The man's either a fool or an idiot, maybe both. Rebecca tried to hide her smile behind her napkin, but she couldn't help but wonder what Rick had seen that everyone else had missed. Her brothers joined their father's laughter, making jokes about the fool who threw away good money on worthless iron. But as Rick arranged for the safe's transport to his property the next morning, he moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had just made the deal of a lifetime. The Grangers could laugh all they wanted. Soon, they would understand exactly what $10 had bought him. The safe would be delivered at dawn, and then the real work would begin. Dawn brought 4 men with a flatbed wagon and enough rope to move a mountain. The safe fought them every inch of the way, its massive weight threatening to snap axles and crush toes. Rick watched from his porch, sipping coffee and occasionally calling out instructions with the calm patience of someone who knew exactly where he wanted the iron beast placed. "Right there, next to the workshop," he said, pointing to a spot he had carefully prepared the night before. A patch of level ground, reinforced with stones positioned to catch the morning light. The men struggled and swore, but they finally managed to position the safe exactly where Rick wanted it. After they had gone, Rick spent an hour just walking around his acquisition, observing it from different angles like a sculptor studying raw marble. He traced the patterns of rust with his finger, tested the thickness of the metal, and examined every rivet and seam. What he found seemed to satisfy him completely. The real mystery began when Rick started making trips into town. Each trip brought back supplies that bore no logical connection to repairing a safe. Copper pipes he carried like precious cargo. Small glass vials he wrapped in cloth and handled with extreme care. Tiny metal gears so precise they looked like watch parts. Rubber hoses he examined for leaks with obsessive attention. Metal fittings so specific he had to special order them from the railroad supply depot. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, watched him load his wagon with growing bewilderment. "What are you building out there, Rick?" "Something useful," was all he would say, tipping his hat politely before heading off. Rebecca Granger now found excuses to ride past his property almost every day. She would see him working with tools she couldn't identify, cutting, grinding, and measuring with the focused intensity of a watchmaker. The sounds coming from his workshop defied explanation. They weren't the heavy, clanging blows of blacksmithing, but the careful, precise manipulation of metal and glass. Most intriguing were the modifications he was making to the safe itself. The door was now propped open with a wooden support, revealing an interior that Rick had completely gutted, where thick walls had once protected valuables. He was installing what looked like a labyrinth of copper pipes and glass chambers. Each piece fit together with mathematical precision into a design that existed only in his head. When Virgil Granger finally rode over to see what the fool was up to, Rick simply nodded pleasantly and continued his work. Virgil tried to make sense of the organized chaos spread around the safe, but every question was met with the same polite evasion. "Looks like you're building some kind of contraption," Virgil said, unable to hide his curiosity despite his earlier mockery. Rick paused his work and wiped his hands on a clean rag. "Every good idea starts with people thinking you're crazy," he said quietly. But what Rick was building would prove to be much more than just a good idea. By the second week, Rick's project had become the town's favorite topic of conversation. Every trip to the general store brought new speculation about what the quiet man was constructing inside that old safe. The theories ranged from the practical to the absurd, but none came close to explaining the careful precision of his work or the strange materials he continued to acquire. Rebecca found herself riding by his property more frequently, always finding some excuse for her route. She had noticed that Rick worked in stages, completing one section before moving to the next, with methodical patience. The copper pipes now formed intricate patterns inside the safe, connected by joints so perfect they looked like the work of a master plumber. But what truly fascinated her were the small gears he was installing throughout the system. Each one was positioned with precision to interact with mechanical arms that moved when he turned a central wheel. Her curiosity finally overcame her restraint when she saw Rick testing something with water. He filled one of his glass containers and slowly poured it into an opening at the top of his contraption. The gears began to turn as the weight of the water tripped the mechanical system, automatically controlling valves and directing the flow down various paths. Rubber hoses carried the water to different sections, while the system of gears regulated the pressure and timing with clockwork accuracy. "Afternoon, Miss Granger," Rick greeted, noticing her watching him. His tone was friendly, but revealed nothing about his work. "Good afternoon, Rick. That's quite an elaborate project you have there." She tried to sound casual, but her eyes kept following the mesmerizing movement of the gears and the controlled flow of water through his automated system. "Every problem has a solution," he replied, using his carved wooden tool to make minute adjustments to the gear's alignment. "Sometimes, you just have to build it yourself." Rebecca wanted to ask what problem required such mechanical complexity, but something in his demeanor suggested he wasn't ready to share that information. Instead, she watched him calibrate the gear ratios with mathematical precision, each adjustment affecting multiple aspects of the system's operation. News of Rick's mechanical tests reached Virgil Granger that evening. The old rancher's initial amusement was giving way to genuine irritation. Having a fool for a neighbor was one thing, but having a fool who constantly drew attention was becoming an embarrassment. Visitors to the ranch kept asking about the strange contraption being built nearby, forcing Virgil to admit he had no idea what his neighbor was doing. "The man's probably gone completely mad," Virgil muttered to his sons at dinner. "Building some kind of elaborate nonsense that serves no purpose." But Rebecca remembered the focused intensity in Rick's eyes, the precision of his measurements, and the sophisticated mechanical engineering of his work. This wasn't the behavior of a madman. It was the systematic approach of someone solving a complex problem with groundbreaking innovation. The question was, what problem required such an automated, gear-driven solution? And why was Rick being so secretive about what appeared to be a work of mechanical genius? The confrontation came on a Wednesday morning, when Virgil Granger finally lost his patience with the spectacle in his backyard. He rode over with his two sons, their horses kicking up dust as they approached Rick's workshop, with the unmistakable arrogance of men accustomed to getting their way. Rick was making final adjustments to his gear system, calibrating the mechanical controls that regulated water pressure throughout his automated contraption. Several rubber hoses led water into different sections, while small gears controlled the timing and flow rates with clockwork precision. Each metal filter was positioned exactly where mechanical arms could rotate them for cleaning and replacement. "Boone!" Virgil bellowed, his voice carrying the authority of a man who owned most of the valley. "We need to talk." Rick looked up from his work, his expression calm and attentive. "Morning, Virgil. What can I do for you?" "You can explain what in the hell you're building here. I have people showing up at my ranch daily, asking questions I can't answer, making me look like I don't know what's happening on my own land." "It's not your land," Rick said quietly, but without challenge in his voice. "I bought this property fair and square." Virgil's eldest son, Marcus, stepped forward with poorly controlled aggression. It doesn't matter who owns the land. What matters is, you're making us all look like fools with this crazy contraption of yours. Rick continued his work, using his carved wooden calibration tool to adjust the gear ratios with mathematical precision. There's nothing crazy about solving a problem that needs to be solved. What problem? Rebecca's voice cut through the tension as she arrived on horseback, having seen the confrontation unfolding from a distance. What exactly are you trying to solve, Rick? For the first time since his project began, Rick stopped his work completely. He looked at his automated system, the gears poised to turn, the pressure chambers positioned for optimal function. And then he looked back at the group of Grangers watching him with expressions that ranged from anger to curiosity. Clean water, he said simply. Automatically. On demand. The words hung in the air like a challenge no one understood. Virgil let out a sarcastic laugh. Water? We have an entire river running through this valley. What do we need your contraption for? Rick walked over to the wooden barrel he kept beside his workshop and plunged a tin cup into the murky brown liquid inside. Drink this, he said, offering the cup to Virgil. No way. That water's been sitting in that barrel for weeks. Exactly. Rick poured the stagnant water into his system's intake. Immediately, gears began to turn. Pressure built automatically as rubber hoses directed the flow through several chambers. Filters of sand, charcoal, and stone worked in sequence, while mechanical arms adjusted pressure and timing. What emerged from the output spout was perfectly clear, flowing at precisely controlled rates, as fresh as mountain spring water. But the true demonstration was yet to come. Rick spun a central wheel, and the entire system reconfigured itself, gears shifting to automatically clean and replace the filters, maintaining continuous operation. The silence that followed was long enough for everyone present to understand they were witnessing something far more revolutionary than a simple water filter. The silence that followed Rick's demonstration stretched like a taut rope, ready to snap. Marcus Granger stepped closer to the contraption. His eyes traced the smooth interplay of the gears and the crystalline water flowing from the outlet. The mechanical precision was undeniable, but what troubled him more than the ingenuity were the implications of what he was witnessing. It changes nothing, Virgil said finally, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. It's still just a fancy way to clean water. We have wells and the river for that. But Rebecca could see the worry dawning in her father's expression. Clean water on demand was valuable enough, but an automated system that required no constant human operation was something else entirely. This wasn't just innovation. It was the kind of breakthrough that could shift power and influence throughout the entire valley. Rick turned another wheel on his system, and the gears adjusted to a different configuration. The water now flowed faster, with greater pressure, while the filters continued their automatic cleaning cycle. Wells run dry, he said, his voice low. Rivers turn to mud. This works, regardless of the weather or the season. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. During the dry months, the Granger ranch often struggled with water quality. The cattle would sometimes refuse to drink from the turbid creek, and the family had lost livestock more than once to waterborne diseases. An automated system that guaranteed clean water would be worth more than gold to any rancher facing those challenges. How much water can it process? Rebecca asked, her practical mind already calculating the possibilities. Depends on the pressure and the configuration, Rick replied, demonstrating by adjusting the gear ratios to increase the flow rates. Right now, enough for a large family, but the design is scalable. Build it bigger, it processes more volume. Virgil's face darkened as the full meaning settled in. This wasn't just one man's clever invention. This was about reliable access to the most critical resource in a region where water often meant the difference between prosperity and failure. If Rick could provide that resource consistently, automatically, and in large quantities, he could challenge the established order that had kept the Grangers in power for decades. "Do you plan on selling these things?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice casual, while his mind raced through the competitive implications. Rick met his gaze evenly. "I plan on using this one first. See how it holds up over time. Make improvements where they're needed." The machine continued its flawless operation. The gears turned with clockwork precision. The water flowed, clear and constant. Every second of its smooth performance strengthened Rick's position and weakened the Granger's assumption that they could dismiss him as a harmless fool. Rebecca watched her father and brother exchange a meaningful glance, the kind of silent communication that passed between men accustomed to controlling their environment through wealth and influence. She recognized the expression. They were calculating whether Rick Boone was an opportunity to be exploited or a threat to be eliminated. What worried her most was that she wasn't sure which conclusion they would reach. News of Rick's demonstration spread through town faster than a brush fire. By nightfall, 3 more families had come to see the contraption for themselves. Rick received each visitor with the same quiet courtesy, explaining nothing beyond what they could observe with their own eyes. The mechanical system performed perfectly for every spectator. Dirty water went in, clean water came out, and the gears kept turning with precision, without pause or failure. Each demonstration bolstered Rick's reputation while chipping away at the Granger's standing as the most influential family in the valley. Mrs. Patterson arrived with her husband just before sunset. Drawn by the stories she'd heard from previous visitors, she watched as Rick poured mud-choked creek water into his system and collected crystal-clear drinking water from the output tap. The automatic operation impressed her, but what truly caught her attention was the consistent quality of the results. "How long does it take to build one of these?" she asked, her practical mind already considering the possibilities for her boarding house business. "Depends on the size and complexity needed," Rick replied, adjusting the pressure settings to accommodate different flow requirements. This one took 3 weeks, working mostly nights and weekends. Her husband studied the gear mechanisms with the focused attention of someone who understood machinery. "What happens when something breaks?" "Those gears look precise enough that any damage could stop the whole system." Rick demonstrated by deliberately disengaging one section of the gearing, showing how the system automatically rerouted the water flow through alternate pathways, maintaining operation. "I built redundancy into the design," he explained, re-engaging the gears with a simple flick of a lever. "Multiple pathways ensure continuous function, even during maintenance." The crowd of onlookers grew as more neighbors arrived to witness what everyone was calling the most significant innovation their community had seen in decades. Rick answered questions patiently, but Rebecca noticed he revealed only operational details, never discussing the engineering principles that made his system possible. Virgil Granger watched the growing crowd from his porch, his expression darkening with each new arrival. The social dynamics of the entire valley were shifting before his very eyes, and the center of attention was no longer his ranch, but the homestead of a man he had dismissed as a fool just hours before. "We need to do something about this," Marcus said, joining his son on the porch. "People are starting to look at Boone like he's some kind of genius inventor." "Maybe he is," Rebecca said, stepping outside to join them. Maybe we were wrong to laugh at him. Virgil gritted his teeth. Wrong or right, it doesn't matter now. What matters is that every family in this valley is going to want one of those devices, and they'll pay whatever Boone asks for it. The implications were clear to all three of them. Water was the foundation of every successful farm, ranch, and business in the region. Anyone who could provide clean, reliable water automatically would hold immense economic power. The established hierarchy that kept the Grangers at the top of the valley's society was about to face its first major challenge in 20 years. As night fell and the last of the visitors left Rick's property, the Granger family faced a reality they had never expected. Their neighbor wasn't just clever, he was a revolutionary. And revolutions, even technological ones, had a way of changing everything people thought they knew. The confrontation came at dawn, 3 days later, when Virgil Granger arrived at Rick's property with a leather satchel full of cash and the confidence of a man accustomed to buying his way out of problems. Rick was performing routine maintenance on his water system, cleaning filters and adjusting gear ratios for optimal performance. "Morning, Boone," Virgil said, dismounting with deliberate ceremony. "I have a business proposal for you." Rick looked up from his work, wiping his hands on a clean rag. "I'm listening." Virgil opened the satchel, revealing more money than most people in the valley saw in a year. $500 for your contraption and the plans to build another. Cash, right here, right now. The offer hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. $500 was a considerable fortune, enough to buy prime ranch land or start a major business venture. For a man who'd spent $10 on a rusted safe, it was an unimaginable sum. "That's generous," Rick said quietly, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "You bet it's generous. It's more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes." Virgil's voice carried the authority of someone who expected immediate acceptance. "All you have to do is pack your things and move on. Find yourself a nice place somewhere else and live comfortably." Rick walked slowly around his contraption, checking fittings and watching the steady stream of clean water pour from the tap. The mechanical operation remained flawless, gears turning in precise time, pressure holding at ideal levels without human intervention. "What about the families who want their own systems?" Rick asked. "That's not your concern anymore. I'll handle distribution. I'll handle the pricing. I'll make sure everyone gets what they need, at a fair price." Rebecca arrived on horseback, drawn by the early morning conversation. She had been expecting this confrontation ever since witnessing her family's growing anxiety over Rick's influence. The sight of the money satchel confirmed her worst fears about their intentions. "And if I say no?" Rick asked, continuing his maintenance routine as if the conversation were about the weather instead of life-changing sums of money. Virgil's friendly demeanor hardened. "Then you'll find that being a neighbor in this valley can get very uncomfortable for someone who doesn't know how to cooperate." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. The Grangers controlled enough land, water rights, and business dealings to make life difficult for anyone who crossed them. Most people facing that kind of pressure would have taken the money and disappeared. Rick finished his adjustments and stepped back to observe his system's performance. Clean water flowed steadily, gears maintained perfect sync, and the pressure held constant. Everything worked exactly as designed, with no need for an external power source and with minimal human oversight. "I appreciate the offer," Rick said finally, "but I think I'll just keep working on the improvements." The rejection hit Virgil like a physical blow. No one had refused his money or defied his influence in more years than he could remember. The implications were staggering. If Rick couldn't be bought or bullied, then the traditional methods of control were useless. What happened next would determine whether innovation could triumph over established power, or if some forces were simply too entrenched to be challenged. The sound of approaching riders shattered the tense standoff. Mrs. Patterson came galloping up, her face flushed with panic, her horse lathered from the hard ride. Behind her came three more townspeople, all wearing the same look of desperate urgency. "Rick!" she cried, barely taking the time to dismount. "The main well went bad during the night. Something got into the water supply and it's making people sick. The doctor says it's not safe to drink." Virgil's face went pale as he grasped the implications. The town's main well supply supplied most of the businesses and many of the homes. Without it, the entire community faced a crisis that could last for weeks or months while they dug new wells or found alternative sources. "How bad?" Rebecca asked, her earlier concerns about family power struggles suddenly feeling petty in the face of a genuine emergency. "Bad enough that we've got 20 people sick already," Mrs. Patterson answered. "The doctor is treating them, but he says we need clean water for the whole town, and we need it now." Rick walked over to his device and began making adjustments to the gear ratios and pressure settings. "How many people are we talking about?" "Nearly 300 souls counting the outlying farms," one of the other riders replied. The group watched as Rick reconfigured his system, but the single unit clearly couldn't produce enough volume for such a large population. Virgil started to speak, likely to point out the obvious limitations, when Rick walked to what everyone had assumed was a storage shed behind his workshop. He swung open the doors to reveal three more complete water purification systems, each larger than the original, and connected by an elaborate network of pipes and pressure chambers. The mechanical complexity was staggering. Gears, wheels, and automated controls filled the entire structure in a precisely engineered array that could process thousands of gallons a day. "I've been testing different configurations," Rick explained calmly, initiating the expanded system's startup sequence. He had wanted to be certain the project worked flawlessly before revealing it to anyone. The Grangers stood in stunned silence as Rick activated what was, in essence, a water treatment station powered entirely by mechanical engineering and water pressure. A series of intake pipes drew water from various sources, while automated systems cleaned, filtered, and distributed it as purified water through a network Rick had evidently been planning for months. This could supply the entire valley," Rebecca whispered, her voice filled with awe. Rick simply nodded as clean, fresh water began to gush from several outlets, at a rate that dwarfed his initial demonstration unit. "I built it to handle growth," Rick explained calmly. "The population has been on the rise, and I figured we would eventually need the extra capacity." Virgil Granger, a man who had never been lost for words in his entire adult life, found himself utterly unable to speak. The man he had dismissed as a fool had just single-handedly solved the valley's most critical infrastructure crisis, all while Virgil himself had been focused on protecting his own influence. The leather pouch of money in his hands suddenly felt pathetic, utterly inadequate compared to the revolutionary system thrumming to life before his very eyes. Within hours, Rick's expanded installation was providing clean water to every single family in the valley. The crisis was over. The community was saved, and the man who bought a rusty safe for $10 had proven to be exactly what the valley needed most: a creator of solutions, not just a protector of territory. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now for another unforgettable tale where determination and innovation collide in ways you never imagined. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to help us continue bringing you more stories just like this one. Your support means the world to us.